You ever get that feeling that talking to people online is just broken? Like, no matter what you say or how carefully you say it, you're just talking past each other. Well, today we're going to dig into why that is, why our old rules for understanding people completely fall apart online, and what we might need to replace them with to even begin to make sense of it all. We've always been told to assume good faith, right? To be charitable in a disagreement. But what if that's not the actual problem? What if the room we're all talking in is designed in a way that makes good faith almost beside the point? That's really the question we're going to get into today. So, to figure out what's going on now, we have to look back at how we used to navigate these things. We're going to start with the traditional tool we've always used for social interactions, and why it's basically become an obsolete compass. And this is it. This is the old rule book. It's called the principle of charity. And it's a really powerful idea that was created for, actual people talking to each other face to face. The basic idea is simple. You assume the person you're talking to is rational and is trying to say something true. You give them the benefit of the doubt. This kind of grace is what makes conversation even possible. But it was designed for humans. And this slide just perfectly lays out the issue. We think we're interpreting a human speaker, but what we're actually interpreting is the output of a media pipeline. See, a person has intentions. A system, it just ranks content. A person tries to be coherent. A system uses templates and recycled language to manufacture a style that looks coherent. So when we apply that principle of charity, are we really being generous to a person, or are we just being gullible with a machine that's designed to trick us? Okay, so if our old way of interpreting things doesn't work on the system, then we have to look at the system itself, right? The argument here is that the platform, the very architecture of our attention, is now the main character in the story. It's setting the temperature for every single interaction before we even type a word. This right here, this is the single most important idea to get. The loop is hot before anyone speaks. Just imagine walking into a room where the thermostat is already cranked all the way up. The environment is preheated. It sets the pace, it sets the intensity, motion, speed. That comes first. Meaning and understanding are just left trying to catch up. So what's cranking up that thermostat? What are the mechanisms that are setting this heat? Well, the source material points to 4 big ones. The constant cadence of notifications that chop up our time. The infinite scroll that literally removes the concept of an ending. The variable reward schedules, which, let's be honest, is just a fancy term for a slot machine, that keep us pulling the lever. And of course, that manufactured coherence we just talked about, which makes the whole thing feel deceptively human. Now, this is where it gets really wild. We tend to think of our social feeds as a kind of stage where conversations play out, but they're not. They're control systems. Things like trending topics or those little integrity meters they roll out, they aren't neutral mirrors of what's happening. They are the actual knobs and dials that engineers are turning to decide what you see, what gets pushed to the top, and what just vanishes. And this control system has a direct effect on our brains. It makes real judgment nearly impossible. First, it gets rid of endings. No end means no closure. Second, it scatters our focus, keeping our brains in this constant search mode, always hunting for that next little dopamine hit. And here's the knockout punch. Without an endpoint, an idea or a claim can't actually be fully formed and then judged. It just sort of glows. It just hangs there in your feed, unfinished and immune to any real thinking. Okay, so this isn't just some abstract philosophical problem. This whole heated loop has a real, tangible human cost. So let's turn to some of the documented harms that come from this architecture, especially when it comes to younger people. This quote from a clinical analysis is, well, it's chilling. It talks about something called pathogenic participation. Basically, harmful stuff like self-harm content or eating disorder posts isn't just seen one time. The algorithm brings it back to you over and over again. So the person isn't just experiencing a bad thing, they're experiencing its constant, scheduled return. It's put on their calendar by the algorithm. And that scheduled return of toxic content leads to measurable clinical outcomes. I mean, we're talking about things like anxiety cascades, imitative contagion, where harmful behaviors literally spread like a virus, severe sleep disruption, and even malnutrition. These aren't just vague worries. These are documented health crises tied directly to how these platforms work. And the source material is really clear about this. Sleep is the first casualty. It's the first thing the loop takes. That relentless pace of notifications, the pull of the endless scroll, That schedule literally writes itself into our bodies. The loop hijacks our hours before we even get a chance to make a choice. The platform's clock overwrites our body's clock. And this broken logic isn't just staying online. It's leaking out into our real-world institutions. Take AI plagiarism detectors in schools. They're a perfect example. They spit out a probability score. That's all it is, a model's output. But it's often treated by the school as a hard fact, as a final verdict on a student's character. But here's the thing. The actual agencies that regulate this stuff are shouting from the rooftops that these tools are not reliable. And the result? The source points to clusters of wrongful accusations. We're talking about real kids facing real consequences, all because an institution made a fundamental mistake. They took a machine's guess and treated it as reality. So if the old language, words like grace and charity, is failing us, what are we supposed to replace it with? And this brings us to the really big idea of this whole explainer. We need a whole new vocabulary to even talk about this new reality we're in. The new term being proposed is gravity. Now, it's really important to get this. This isn't a mood. It's not like saying a conversation is grave or serious. It's a descriptive term, almost like in physics. Gravity is the name for all those pre-existing conditions we've been talking about. The heat of the loop, the pace of notifications, the pressure of the templates. It is the invisible but massive weight of the system itself, a force that's pulling on all of us before we even open our mouths. And this is the whole thing in a nutshell. The old way, charity or grace, was an act of interpretation. It assumed you were talking to a human, and it focused on their good faith. This new model, gravity or weight, is an act of description. It acknowledges the system is the main actor, and it forces us to look at the conditions that system creates. It's a huge shift from asking, what did that person mean, to asking, what is the system even allowing to be said here and how? And so that leaves us here with this really tough question. If the thermostat is already set to boiling before we even walk in the room, if the rules of the game are fixed by a control system before we show up, how and where can we possibly exercise real, meaningful judgment? Acknowledging the gravity of the situation doesn't solve the problem, not by a long shot. But maybe, just maybe, it's the first step to actually seeing the problem for what it is.